Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I wanted to do something a bit different that I haven't done before, and this was inspired by Kieran over at KD Books, and that was to talk about some of the books that I have struggled with reading and whether or not it was worth it to persevere. I obviously read a lot on this channel, I talk a lot about various different types of books, but there are some books that I have really struggled to get through, that I have found a slog and have taken me a lot of time for various different reasons. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about what made the books difficult for me and whether I thought that the process was worthwhile, because some books may be difficult and it may be a chore to get through them, but at the end you have a sense of achievement, like running a marathon or something, and the books have brought something to you and have given you something that you wouldn't have got without persevering. Whereas sometimes you get to the end and you're like, why did I waste my time doing that? So I thought maybe I could help you guys out if there are some difficult books you are planning to read. The first book on my list is the Swan book by Alexis Wright. Alexis Wright is an Aboriginal Australian author, and this book is kind of a dystopian future, and it is about a girl who suffers a brutal rape and stops talking, and she lives in this Aboriginal community that have been closed off by the Australian government. The water in their community is really polluted, and then also there is Australia's first Aboriginal president, and he's the president, not the Prime Minister, because they've become a republic in this future, and it's very much about climate change and environmental degradation and colonialism, but it's not a straightforward story at all. It jumps about in time, it jumps about in perspective, and it's written in a very odd style. I found myself, every time I picked it up, I would again be really confused and not know where I was and have to get into the rhythm of it. And because I was reading it physically, I think that made it even harder for me. I'm definitely an audiobook girl at heart anyway, but I think that because I was reading it physically, I was picking it up and putting it down more often than I do with an audiobook, because obviously I have to do stuff. And so I found that there was a lot of resistance to picking the book up because it was so difficult to get back into. It was a lot of the time very beautifully written, but also very strangely written, and I would have to reread paragraphs to make sure I really understood what was going on. I read articles about it after I had finished it that talked about Aboriginal Australian styles of storytelling and oral storytelling tradition, and how that works into Alexis Wright's writing and the way that she went about writing the Swan book. And so that is part of the reason that it is so different from what I am used to from a Western novel perspective. But I have read other things that follow from an oral tradition that is not what I am used to, like The Dead Wander in the Desert by Roland Saizenbayev, which is a Kazakh oral tradition, and Glory by No Violet Bulawayo, which uses elements of Zimbabwean oral tradition, and both of those books worked for me in a way that this one I struggled so much more with. And I would say for me, this one wasn't worth it because it's one of those books that I really admired and I really wished I could understand what was going on, but I couldn't find my way into it. And so I'm not saying that the book isn't worth it, but that it didn't, me and that book were not compatible at the time at which I read it. It's one of those books that may have been interesting if I'd had someone holding my hand, like if I was studying it at university or something, that then if someone had been sort of guiding me through it, I might have got more out of it than I did just reading it by myself. It was definitely one of the hardest reading experience of a contemporary novel that I've had, and I found that I don't remember much of what went on in that novel, and I think that is in part because I struggled so much with it. In an entirely different vein, we have She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker-Chan, which is based on Chinese folklore or history. No, it's based on Chinese history, but with a bit of folklore mixed into it, a bit mixed in with legend, and it's based on a king, but in this book it is his twin sister. He dies and his twin sister takes over his identity, and she is living the life through medieval China. This book was not difficult in terms of the style of the writing or in terms of the form that was used, like the Swan book was. It was very much a straightforward novel, and exact kind of what you would expect from a fantasy like that, but I'm not a fantasy reader or more history. It was just a lot military. There was a lot of military stuff in it, and I find that a slog to get through, and it doesn't really work for me. This book had several scenes that I found gratuitous and uncomfortable, and I read weird books with violence and all sorts of strange stuff in them, but this book had I'm going to say the word fisting. It had the most uncomfortable fisting, probably the only fisting scene that I have read in memory, and definitely the most uncomfortable, gratuitous fisting scene. Let's move on. But I found this struggle to get through for that. I found that there were moments of this real, like, in detail physicality, and then moments of this bigger picture, and it didn't quite link up for me, and I really struggled. And again, for me, it helped me to know that I really don't want to read any historical fiction that focuses on the military. I just don't care. I think strategy it interests me when it's on a more, like, interpersonal level, like in a court drama kind of thing, not like law court, like Tudor court or royal court. That kind of strategy and planning and manoeuvring around one another, I find really interesting, because it's based in the personal, but like we move the cavalry here and the archers over there. I find it boring, and I'm just not interested in reading that. So yeah, it's things I'm avoiding in books is military history and fisting. Now, a book that I have recommended so many times because I really loved it, but I did struggle to get through it, is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So this is one of the sort of texts? Yeah, one of the sort of texts of magical realism, and it is about a family, the Buendia family, who are in an unnamed Latin American country, and over the course of 100 years, as they move into a town and settle there, and then there is a fight for independence from the colonialists, and then there is neo-colonialism with capitalism involved, and a bloody dictatorship, and various sort of elements of Latin American history, but in this magical way, sort of fantastical elements that are unremarked upon as works with magical realism. I have a whole video essay about magical realism if you want to learn more, that I will leave in the cards above, and I did really love it. Incredibly beautifully written, but it is difficult. I did struggle with it, and it's another one where I had to keep rereading things, because Gabriel Garcia Marquez does this thing where he jumps about in time, but not in a way that you get used to it because it's continuous. It's just that sometimes he starts a chapter with a time jump from what you've last read and then just works his way backwards, and it's unsettling because it's not all the time. So I would often find myself beginning a new chapter and feeling like I'd missed something when I hadn't. And also the other things that everyone struggles with is that everybody has the exact same name. There are literally 27 people called the same thing, because one man names all of his children the same thing and has 27 sons. And not to spoil anything, but Marquez does do quite a good job of solving that problem quite quickly. But in general, there's just so many characters, and it's not like any of the characters are like fully fleshed out, developed. It's not a character-driven book. It's very much like an ideas-driven book. The repetition of the characters, they reappear because generational trauma and things like that ricochet through the book, and I really, really enjoyed it. I think it's a great book, so I'm glad that I persevered through this one. And it is books like that make me persevere through all the other difficult books, because it really settled in with me, and I think that persevering with a difficult book can make it one that, if it becomes satisfying at the end, really sits with you and sticks to you, and that is true for me with Marquez. Another classic that I read last year is East Goes West by Younghill Kang, which is the first book published by a Korean-American writer, and it is autofiction about a young man who has served in the military in Korea and has had some sort of traumatic past with the Japanese occupation of Korea, and has moved to America to become a student, and he's just sort of moving around the east coast of America, bopping about, meeting different people and having experiences. Quite episodic. I think it's the 1930s in this book, or the 1920s, and it is quite episodic. It's a very long book, and so it feels a little like Dickens in terms of like could have been serialized, because there are so many contained episodes, and it was a book that I struggled to get a grasp of what was going on, what was the perspective. I enjoyed reading it for a perspective on a moment in history that I am unfamiliar with. I thought that it had moments of really beautiful writing, but it was quite difficult to connect to, and I felt like there were several layers and things that I was not getting. There was a lot of references and things that I did not get, and I find that that's true of a lot of works of this time period, the sort of 20s to the 60s. There's a lot of like references and a lot of you have to know things before you go in, and I felt that that was true of this book. I didn't feel like I had the broad enough knowledge of the time period or of the literature of the time period to really understand what was going on a lot of the time. And also I found it, I don't have a strong memory of it, again, like I said with the Swan book, because I feel like I have memories of different moments, like his first arrival in Chinatown, going to a Chinese restaurant. So there are moments that have stuck with me, but this one I'm not sure whether I am glad I read it or not. Like, it's not one that I definitely wish I hadn't read or that didn't offer anything. It's one that I still struggle with in my memory of it. It's one that I feel uncertain about, and books like that often make me wish I could reread them, but also because obviously I can reread them. That is perfectly something I'm capable of, but because they are so long and because they are confusing, because I've already read them, there are very many reasons not to reread them. And it's another one that I think, again, if I'd had someone holding my hand through it and explaining a lot of those references and explaining the layers of it, I would maybe have had a better time than I did trying to read it by myself. There's a lot of classics on here, and another one is A Grain of Wheat by Ngugi wa Thiongo, which is a classic, as I said, set in Kenya in the 1960s, I believe, and it is about a group of men who were detained during the Mau Mau rebellion in the concentration camps by the British, and they have come back to their town, but someone has died, and they're trying to work out who gave information, who informed on him, and caused him to be executed. And so we flash back and forward in time between them before they were captured and the beginnings of the Mau Mau rebellion, and during the time at the camp. And we also follow the English man who was in charge of that camp, and who committed like incredible brutalities. And this is a book that I struggled with because it was written in such a like detached style. I found that I wasn't quite grasping it. I didn't feel quite like, okay, I'm in and I understand what's going on. Like, I understood what was going on, but I didn't feel... It's just a sort of a feeling that's hard to explain what I mean, but I found that I struggled with the emotions of the book and with feeling like I understood the perspective of the book. I wasn't quite sure what was being said and why it was being said in the way that it was. I did again enjoy reading it from the perspective of a period of history, and I definitely feel like this one had I felt more satisfied the more I read it. Like, I felt like I grasped what was going on the more I read it, and the ending I found really powerful, and I am glad that I read it for that reason. But it is another book I struggle with a lot of the time. I think it's true of all of the classics on this list, is that they are mid-century classics. Between the 30s and the 70s, I guess I struggle a lot with books of that time period, and I'm not sure what it is about them. When books before that time period I'm fine with, I can get on with a Victorian, a Georgian book, even like Walter Scott I find less confusing than a mid-century classic, which is I guess it's something to do with structuralism or post-structuralism, and that sort of... I've never studied anything like that, like barely glanced against it in my English A-level, and so I'm not like particularly au fait with the form and with the styles of what people were trying to do with the novel in the mid-century, and I think that is why I come up against difficulties with these books. I think that's what's going on. There's just something about that time period. All of the classics are from that time period, and there is just something about it that I struggle with, and I haven't quite grasped what it is yet, as you can tell by my lack of articulacy in this area. There's something about me and that time period that doesn't connect. And another one that is on my list that relates to that is Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. This one I did feel glad that I'd read it by the end, because I felt myself understanding what was going on. It is not a book that is clear to follow the plot or what is going on. So this is written in the 1960s, so it is in the same period I was talking about, but it is also written in relation to Russian classics, and the sort of Russian canon, I think, is very important to this book. And now that I've read more Russian books, I feel like I'm more aware of the style that's being used and sort of played with in terms of Dr. Zhivago. There are elements of long like tracts of people talking about philosophy, which I hate. I hate philosophical writing. I really don't like it. But if I can read it from a like character perspective, or it's telling me something about that, then it's all right. If it feels like it's coming from the author, I can't be getting on with it. It always feels pretentious, and I'm not a fan. And so there are elements of that. There is really gorgeous writing about Russian countryside, the moment when the train gets stuck in the snow and they have to shovel themselves out, and just so stunning and still sits with me. But it was because of the way that it's hard to follow, like this sentence, which makes no sense. Let's start again. It is hard to follow the course, the trajectory of the characters, and because there are so many interpolations of thoughts about politics and history and philosophy, it becomes hard to know if you have grasped what is going on, if there is something missing. And because of course there is all the Russian names, the patronymics, the nicknames, you know, you could be called Sergei Ivanovich in one moment and Serozha in another moment, and you're trying to work out, is that the same person? I found that with your core characters you're usually alright. It's like background characters, and you just have to accept sometimes that you don't know what's going on, and you just have to let it wash over you. And it is another book that I feel like further reading, rereading it, having help from someone who studies it to go through it would have really helped me, but I didn't have that, and so I had to persevere by myself. I'm kind of glad I did, but I didn't love it the way that I'd hoped I would. I did have more books on my list, but I have rambled on for a very long time about books that I struggle with and why I struggle with reading them. So I'm going to let you go, and I will see you again another time. Please do let me know your thoughts about struggling with books, what books you struggle with. Do you have any insights into why the mid-century classics might be so difficult for me? I would love to hear from you. And just let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe. I put out new videos twice a week, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.